Good afternoon. I'm Julie Decker, President and CEO of the FSU Alumni Association, and I'd like to welcome you to our Webinar Wednesday series. I am grateful that you registered to join us for today's dialogue. Across the country and even around the world, issues of injustice, police brutality, and racism are being confronted. The FSU Alumni Association will continue to leverage our platform to give voice to our FSU family as we collectively confront the racial injustice experienced by Black Americans. We invite you to join in by mentoring a student, getting involved with one of our 7 networks or 80+ Seminole clubs, or participating in webinars just like this one today. I am thankful for the leaders who have gathered here today to share their wisdom and experience with us. We're very lucky to hear from them. Right now, I'd like to introduce one of our panelists and our moderator for this afternoon, 2-time FSU alumnus Ali Moore. Ali currently serves as the Vice President of the FSU Alumni Association's National Black Alumni Network. Ali is an Atlanta-based business consultant, leadership coach, and strategist with over 25 years of organizational development training, change management, and business readiness experience. He is the CEO and founder of X Factor Solutions. He is passionate about helping people from all walks of life identify and grow their unique leadership talents. Today, Ali will lead the panel in part 2 of our diversity, equity, and inclusion and moving forward together. Ali?
Thanks, Julie. Let me start my video here. And for those who see when the still picture is on, that is a picture of my wife. Right before we started this webinar, my computer crashed, and so I'm using her computer for this webinar. So when you see that picture, that's her, not me. But thanks, Julie. It's my pleasure to be the moderator of part 2 of this webinar. I think part 1 was successful, and we talked about some of the things that FSU was doing around this focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But we're going to use today really to revisit that topic and give people an opportunity to talk about what we've done since that last call. So I want to make sure that we have enough time today. So let me jump on in and introduce our panelists. First, we have Brandon Bowden, Dr. Brandon Bowden. Brandon is a 3-time graduate of Florida State University and is currently the Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs at FSU. Brandon directly supervises strategic planning and assessment, information technology, the Center for Leadership and Social Change, the Center for Global Engagement, and co-supervises the Center for Academic Retention and Enhancement, also known as CARE, along with the Dean of Undergraduate Studies. He serves as a liaison to academic affairs, provides leadership for the university's Black Male Initiative program, and also serves as a faculty member in the College of Education's Higher Education Master's Program. His past experiences include serving as an assistant and associate director in the Oglesby Student Union, as Dean of Students, and also as a Title IX director. So welcome, Brandon. Our next panelist is Dr. Michelle Brown Douglas. Michelle is also an FSU alumna and serves as Director in Human Resources with oversight and responsibility for Equal Opportunity and Compliance, EOC, Diversity and Inclusion, Training and Organizational Development, the Ombuds Program, and Facilities HR. Michelle joined the Florida State HR team in 2014 with over 15 years of experience in personnel management. She holds the Professional in Human Resources certification from HRCI and is trained with the American Association for Access, Equity, and Diversity. Her areas of specialization include employee and labor relations, diversity and inclusion, training and HR legal compliance, as she's a member of CUPA and the American Association for Access, Equity, and Diversity. Welcome, Michelle. And finally, we have Geneva Scott. Geneva serves as the Senior Assistant Director for Experiential Learning within the Florida State University Career Center. In her role, Geneva manages the One-Day Job Shadow Program, FSU Shadow, and the center's mentoring program, Professional. Both programs provide opportunities for all students, regardless of background, to connect with professionals in their field of interest From San Diego, Geneva completed her undergraduate degree in political science at UC Santa Barbara and received her master's degree in education leadership from Point Loma Nazarene University. So welcome to all of our panelists. So starting with Dr. Bowden, Brandon, I'd like for you, and then we'll go through the rest of the panelists as well, to provide a background and information updating us on what your specific tasks, functions, accomplishments have been since the last call that we had a couple of months ago.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ali. So as Ali stated, I serve as an Associate Vice President of Student Affairs, and specifically the area that I work with is called the Inclusive Community Portfolio. And I also have the opportunity to work with our engagement portfolio as well. Specifically with the Inclusive Community Portfolio, I get to work with special populations like our first generation college students in the care program, the care department. I get to work with our cultural agencies and our identity groups as well. And I also get to work with our international students. I also work with our student union and our other facilities to ensure that we are creating and providing a welcoming and inclusive environment for all of our students. And as Ali also stated, I get to work with our Black Male Leadership, Black Male Initiative, which is a program that is meant to help our Black men transition into the university. And so since our last meeting, our last time having this webinar, we actually have revamped the program, and we've built a more robust advisory group to support these men. And then I would say some of the biggest successes I think we've had since the last time that we met is that within Student Affairs, we've also created a diversity and inclusion task force that is focused specifically on looking at how we can hold ourselves accountable and how we can be better and stronger to support our students. So we just established that committee. We'll have our first meeting soon. As part of this task force, we'll have several subcommittees as well. And one of the committees is already up and running, but really what we'll focus on is the campus climate for our students and just really looking at the experiences that they're having on campus. And I would say lastly, since our last time getting together here, we've started the President's Task Force on Anti-Racism, Equity, and Inclusion. And I have the privilege of serving as the chair for the Campus Climate Subcommittee. And so 2 weeks ago, we had the overall committee meeting. Actually today at 3 o'clock, we will have our first subcommittee meeting for Campus Climate. So I would encourage everyone to tune in, but excited to be here today and can't wait to share more.
Thanks, Brandon. We actually have a couple of more minutes. Can you provide a little detail about, for that subcommittee on the President's Task Force, what does the Campus Climate Subcommittee actually entail? What are you all attempting to do?
Absolutely. So one of the primary things that we want to focus on is we want to be able to identify and recommend some sort of tool or some sort of assessment that we can use for the university that will be able to capture this information. And so in the past, we've looked at different organizations, different groups that do this work professionally. I mean, they are legitimately focused on this type of work. And so I think we want to look at something that's going to work for Florida State. In Student Affairs, we have certainly looked at student focus, but for this particular subcommittee, we want to look at faculty, staff, and students. So we want to find an instrument that we think will work for all these different populations where we really can survey our faculty, staff, and students and get a true sense of what they're experiencing on our campus based on how they identify, based on what role they play. Can we really provide what we need to provide? And the only way we can do that is to get that feedback directly from them.
All right. And once that's in place, how often will this sort of campus climate survey be administered?
Absolutely. So I think that's something that the committee will have to work out. Typically in the past, what we've tried to do is administer it every couple of years. You really need some time to kind of cycle through and make sure you understand what is going on campus. You also have to look at point in time. You know, to give you an example, this is an election year. I would expect that the campus climate this year might look different if we did this at the same time, say at the end of next year or middle of the following year. And so that is something that the committee will look at. Most of our surveys are on a 2 to 3 year cycle, just so you can give it time to really see a shift in the climate if there is one. So I think we will be looking to maybe do this maybe by end of year, middle of next year, and then see where we are at that point.
Okay, and you may have touched on this already, but once you get the results of something like a campus climate assessment or survey, what is the transition from taking that data and actually turning it into some tangible changes that we would see at Florida State?
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent question. So I think what we'll do along the way is as we start to get that information in, we sit down with the appropriate parties and we determine how we can best respond to those. And I think at that time, we then take that to the cabinet and share that information with them with a list of recommendations on how we think we can actually implement that. And then at that time, I think we also share with them what resources we need in order to be able to do that. And I feel pretty confident at this point that we have received the full support of the cabinet to be able to provide those resources so that we can respond accordingly.
Very great. And for those who are not familiar with this type of work, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but hypothetically, so give us an example of what a potential result could look like, and then how does that translate into an action or a change on campus?
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example. If our, specifically, we've been having some challenges lately, and if we were to hear from a specific population, so let's say if our Black students said, you know, we don't feel valued on campus, we don't feel like we have a voice at the leadership table, we don't feel like there are staff that represent us, we would take that data and we would go back to the appropriate parties. If it's staff, we'll go back to the leadership team and we'll say, let's look across all of our departments and see if our staff are representative of our student populations. And then we sit down with the leadership team and we say, when we have openings, we need to be more dedicated to being intentional about how we bring in new staff and the types of committees we're putting together. And I can talk a little bit later, but we also want to talk about making sure our search committees are certified through HR. And that's something that Michelle Douglas can talk a little bit more about in a few, what it means to be certified to ensure that we have an equitable and diverse candidate pool.
Great, thanks, Brandon. So that's a good segue over to Dr. Douglas. So Michelle Brown Douglas, Director of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Office and Human Resources. So let's transition to Dr. Douglas. If you can update us, and I know that Dr. Douglas is also part of the President's task force as well. So if you can update us on what your office has been up to since our last meeting and what role you're playing on this task force and what that means, that would be great. Dr. Douglas?
Certainly, Ali, thank you. And just a minor correction, not Dr. Douglas, my better half. So I'm just Michelle. So just a little bit about my role as the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So part of that is making sure that the university is compliant with all of our federal and state regulations as it relates to discrimination, harassment. So I have a team that does that work, and I assist in leading them with that work. And that's a very important role for the university to ensure that, you know, we're abiding by all federal and state regulations. But in addition to that, we have to be proactive in making sure that the climate that we create for our faculty and staff and our students, you know, is one that's not tolerated. So part of my charge is solely looking at those issues as it relates to faculty and staff. Very often it includes student engagement as well. I also wear the hat of Chief Diversity Officer. That's a new role that I've assumed, and that has a broader scope institutionally. And a lot of the work that I'm currently doing is related to that kind of change in role. And I'll talk a little bit in detail about the things that we have been doing in that regard. I also oversee the training and organizational development unit within HR. And we're charged with professional development and providing training opportunities for faculty and staff as well. So those things are all interrelated, however, and I'm starting to see that more with my work on the President's task force. So just to recap, since we last spoke, we have been very busy, not just my office, but across campus. We've held a lot of listening sessions with our faculty and staff particularly. We find that, you know, the events of late, they just keep coming. we have to keep doing the work, but we need opportunity and space to discuss those things and to give folks an opportunity to let us know how they're doing. So we've done a lot of check-ins where it's just space to be, and opportunities to talk. Actually just had this morning a listening session with the staff in the housing unit. I look at them as being at the epicenter on campus as it relates to COVID-19 and other issues. And so the director there wanted to give her staff an opportunity just to have some space and conversation. So a lot of that going on, a lot of training as it relates to equity, diversity, and inclusion. I actually facilitate embracing diversity for faculty and staff. And since we've all last spoken, I've probably facilitated about 20 of those sessions, 25. And they're group sessions, enrollment's about 40 to 50 in each of those sessions. So we're reaching a lot of folks, and folks are reaching out to us as well. As a result of that, we've also trained some other members of our National Coalition Building Institute team to facilitate training. So National Coalition Building Institute, but I'll call it NCBI because it's a mouthful, is a licensed entity where we have members of our campus who are trained in issues of implicit bias, microaggressions, looking at bystander intervention as it relates to harassment and discrimination. So we trained 20 new folks to serve on that team and hoping that that will meet the demand that we have for those NCBI facilitations. So we're really excited about that. And we're also developing other trainings or tweaking some trainings that we have. We have a diversity and inclusion certificate series, one of a few universities in the country to have one. And that is targeting faculty and staff. It's a 1-year-long process that ends in a capstone project. And so we're working to tweak that as well. I've been meeting with a lot of campus partners with regard to efforts campus-wide to do diversity and inclusion work, particularly undergraduate studies. I've had sessions with them. The Campus Rec Center, had a few sessions with them. We have a one-book campus committee where we're working to adopt a book for the campus community to read. And hopefully the plan is that in the spring, we will have it incorporated into curriculum. We'll also have some discussion groups. The Dean of the Libraries is leading that group. We're also working on some other projects to include efforts to educate folks about the history of Tallahassee, particularly as it relates to race. I'm not gonna tell anyone yet because it's still not ready for production, but we have a really exciting opportunity that we'll be introducing to the campus community as well as the local Tallahassee community as well. So when I get more information and permission to kind of talk about that more, I want to definitely update you, Ali, and you, Julie, on that so that you can make people aware of it. As mentioned before, I am one of the co-chairs of the President's Task Force on Anti-Racism, Equity, and Inclusion. The subcommittee that I lead is the Subcommittee on Recruitment, Retention, and Education. So with that group, we're charged specifically at looking at the recruitment and retention of underrepresented faculty and staff, as well as students. And the goal is to look at initiatives or efforts that we can make to not only recruit diverse faculty and staff, as well as students, but also retain and is with students successfully graduate. Part of that work is looking at some of the data and what we look like, what we should be looking like as it relates to representation in the state of Florida. We plan to do some focus groups. We have a really good cross-section of people serving on that committee. We had our first meeting last Wednesday, and we'll be meeting monthly for the public viewing and then doing the work in the background. I encourage everyone to attend those sessions. They are open to the public. There are opportunities for the public to comment. If you just Google President's Task Force FSU, it'll take you straight to the page. And if you're not able to attend, they're all recorded as well. So we definitely want the campus community and our alum to engage in that process because it's all of our work. I also recently met with Julie and Jeff Boynton, the chair of the Alumni Association DEI committee, as initially an introductory meeting, but to talk about how we can partner in our work as well. We find that this work is not to be done in a silo. We need the whole village involved in it. And so that's the approach that we're taking institutionally. The messaging that has come from President Thrasher since day one is that it is all of our responsibilities, you know. So for those of us who are charged with it as our professional, in our professional life, but also the passion that we have as members of this campus community, it's an imperative that we engage and continue the work. So that's just in a nutshell some of the things that I have going on.
That's quite a bit. I'll ask you a follow-up question very similar to what I asked Dr. Bowden. We know that in academia, and particularly at a state institution, things don't just happen overnight. So with the number of initiatives that you are either in charge of or that you're running, how are you and your committee, if it's part of the task force, or how are you and within the multiple organizations that you're leading on campus, how are you ensuring that these efforts are happening in a timely, efficient manner, that the productivity, that you're actually seeing productivity from these efforts, and it's not just checking boxes that you're doing tasks, but these tasks are converting into behavior and cultural changes on campus?
Absolutely. Well, you know, part of the charge that President Thrasher gave us is that he wants results, and he doesn't want, you know, this is a one-year appointment, the task force, and the expectation is not that at the end of the year we provide him a report. We're going to be checking in quarterly, in some instances sooner than that, because there are some things that we can accomplish right now, right? We can start working on them. There are going to be some more long-term initiatives, those initiatives that get at the root of some structural or institutional concerns that we will start working on, but you know, this is long-term. So we definitely have, I guess, an entity in place to continue the work of the task force. So I serve as the liaison for the President's Council on Diversity and Inclusion. This is a group, a cross-section again of faculty, staff, and students that was charged by the president in 2008. So it's been here a while. And the plan is that once the task force completes its work, a lot of the initiatives, the efforts will be moved over to the President's Council. But also we will be also working with different campus partners to make sure that the work is done. We have definitely teamed with institutional research because I think metrics is really important in this type of work because we need to measure our success. So we will be putting into place some efforts at that as well. There's already a template for it. You know, we have the Strategic Plan Committee, the University Strategic Plan Committee, and we have been working on implementing that for about 3-4 years now, because what you often see in higher ed, particularly as it relates to strategic plans, you do it, you put it on a shelf, it gets dusty and nothing's done with it. So our charge, particularly from President Thrasher and also Provost McCrory, was to make it a living, active document. So we have a protocol already in place to make these things come to fruition.
Okay, and that actually starts to touch on my final question for you, and that is, you know, I've attended the task force meetings, I've listened in, and some of the comments when it was part of the public forum were things like, well, what's the difference between this task force and the last task force? We already had a task force on, and then, you know, fill in the details there. What is your response to how is this effort going to be different than any of the efforts in the past?
Well, I think I'm assuming they're referring to the task force that was on namings, that was about a year or a year and a half ago. So there was a different charge and mission with that task force versus this task force. If you even look at just the naming, President's task force on anti-racism, equity, and diversity, it's very broad. That had a very narrow, I guess, focus as it related to statutes and namings and things of that nature. And that task force completed the work that it was charged with, right? What we are doing is a lot broader, expansive, and more long-term, right? As it relates to the structural and institutional things that we have to address. I will note that there is a third subcommittee, part of the task force, that is actually looking at the implementation of some of the recommendations from the previous task force as it relates to statutes and naming. So that work has continued, and it's rolled over into, I think, the broader scope of this new task force.
All right, thanks, Michelle. So let's go ahead and switch over to Geneva. Geneva Scott, Senior Assistant Director for Experiential Learning, FSU Career Center. Geneva, you were not a panelist on our last webinar Wednesday, focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But for our audience today, our participants, if you can give us a little bit of background on what you're working on and how that is impacting this landscape of diversity.
Yeah, happy to, and thrilled to be here. As you probably heard in the beginning, I did not graduate from FSU. I didn't go to the other school, so I'm safe. I'm from California, but my husband is a Knoll and works here now, and so I'm a Knoll through marriage. So I'm thrilled to be here today to share a bit about what the Career Center is doing in this space. This summer, when everything started to happen after following the murder of George Floyd, I had a chance to sit in on a webinar on career services and the response to Black Lives Matter, and our Career Center director, Myrna Hoover, as well as the FAMU Career Center Director, Sharita Harrell, shared something really profound that I think kind of guides what we do. And they said career services work is social justice work. And I think in the Career Center, we deeply believe that, and that's the foundation of what we do. And so we really come from a perspective of trying to focus on increasing access for students to not only experiential learning opportunities, so opportunities to learn outside of the classroom, but connection points to employers and professionals, as well as ensuring that our services are equitable. So we're open to all community members and alumni. We are one of the few career centers in the country that is open to community members. So we do serve the greater Tallahassee community. And then we're theory and research based. So we really look at who we serve and we use that data to inform the programming and services that we do moving forward. So an example of that, and kind of one of the new things we're really excited about, we have recently gotten approval to hire for a dedicated care liaison to support our first-gen students in all aspects of career development. So we're really excited about that. And so that's one thing that we're doing to kind of better support our students. But since the murder of George Floyd and then kind of the reckoning that we're all going through when it comes to racial inequity and systemic racism, the Career Center has had a renewed focus on ensuring that we're not only providing open and accessible services, but that we're really championing employers who are doing this work well, and then providing those programming resources to our students. So we have a diversity and inclusion committee within the Career Center, and Michelle actually recently came into one of our meetings to help us work through some things, but we're really trying to build that strong foundational understanding of where our staff is in this work and where we want to go. So to do this, we've been holding brave space conversations, really ranging in topics from kind of white privilege to unconscious bias, and trying to get all of our staff on the same page of a foundational understanding so then we can move from there. We're working through the National Colleges and Associations, National Association of Colleges and Employers, which is kind of our guiding professional association for career services, has a diversity inclusion checklist that we're working through. And this really ranges from looking at our external communications, print, pictures, are those inclusive to the accessibility of our physical spaces? And so we're working through that to really make sure, again, that at the forefront of what we do, we're thinking about everyone and considering all. And so for students, we have some programs I wanted to highlight that address that equity and access issue that have been in place, but that we're continuing. The first is the Internship Fund, which is one of our initiatives that provides funding for students engaged in experiential learning. All of you here probably know the power of an internship in helping students secure employment after graduation. And we wanted to limit that barrier of access to engaging in experiential learning due to financial barriers. So each, we offer funding. And so this ranges from someone who needs to buy a plane ticket overseas to we funded someone who needed a bike to get to their internship in Tallahassee. And all they asked for was the money for a bike to get to their internship. And so we're looking to institutionalize that fund and hopefully name it. So if you want to name it, let us know. But really institutionalize that fund as a way to provide that access to those opportunities that are so crucial in a student's career development. In addition, in collaboration with the Provost's office, we have 2 additional programs that really increase that access and address that equity piece. And that would be Intern Fsu, which is our paid on-campus internship program that provides funding for undergraduate students to complete on-campus internships. And then FSU Shadow, which is our one-day job shadowing program. Both of those programs provide students an opportunity to build those connections with professionals and employers that perhaps they may not have had the opportunity to do or to gain that experience. And so our most recent session of FSU Shadow this summer, over 40% of our students were first-generation college students, in addition to about 20% being from CARE. So we'd love to see that, and we want to continue to offer those programs to address that equity issue. And then with our employers, we're looking to really recognize employers who have great diversity and inclusion efforts or who are doing that work really well. And so we're looking at ways to do that and share that information with our students so that they're aware of the employers that are champions of this work. And then mentorship. So as mentioned in my bio, I coordinate our university-wide mentorship program, Professional Mentors. And so we, this fall, in partnership with actually the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee within the Alumni Association, are offering some diversity chats focused on different discussion topics that professionals and alumni are comfortable discussing. This really ranges from navigating race in the workplace to women in STEM and leadership. And so we're excited about those initiatives to really build those cross connection points between our alumni and our students, while also showing students themselves in professionals and what they're doing. So those are just a few of the initiatives we've been working on. We're really excited to continue this work, deepen our partnerships across campus. We have representatives. I'm sitting on the department-wide for the division Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and we have other representatives in the Career Center in that space as well. So we're excited for the future, and we're really looking forward to deepening our programming efforts, especially when it comes to our employers.
All right, thanks. Great, Geneva. So I will chime in a little bit about what the FSU Black Alumni is doing as well, and keep us on track here. Unlike the other panelists, the organization that I represent is affiliated with the Alumni Association and the university, but we are not employees of Florida State University. And so the difference between, say, Geneva or Michelle or Brandon speaking on this versus Ali speaking on this is that all of our efforts are done by volunteers to the FSU Black Alumni. One of the pieces of feedback that I received after our first webinar was, other than building or sponsoring and supporting the building of the new BSU house, which was a tremendous undertaking, and doing our annual homecoming, what else does the FSU Black Alumni do? And so for those participants who are joining us today, a few of the things that we're proud to have continued to accomplish since our last call. Number one, despite COVID, we still raised the funds to contribute to our annual scholarships. So the FSU Black Alumni gives multiple scholarships per year, and we didn't let the global pandemic slow us down in that effort. Another one of the things that the FSU Black Alumni does, as particularly around the task force that a couple of our panelists just mentioned, we have representation on these committees and on these task forces, et cetera. So things that the public may not see is that the FSU Black Alumni ensures that we have some representation on each of these committees, subcommittees, the task forces, et cetera. And so that's another thing. Two very recent things that we've done. One is we're working with the Black alumni from Georgia Tech. They saw what we did at FSU. And actually, I meet with Black alumni representatives from multiple universities on a constant basis. Georgia Tech in particular has recently reached out to us to help them in the planning, programming around building a very similar type of structure that we have on FSU's campus in terms of the Black Student Union House. And then a couple of other things. We're actively, well, this is not new, but we're always engaged with the university regarding hiring diverse staff. And we're in the middle of conversations right now, reaching out to our Black alumni in different industries to create programming specific to our students. And so I'll be reaching out to you, Geneva, as well, because we talked about a mentoring effort on our last call, but working through you and through the existing structure that's already there on campus makes more sense than creating a completely new structure for mentoring. And I'm speaking specifically on how the Black alumni can mentor Black students on campus. Okay, so those are some of the things that we're working on. We're always looking for volunteers. So for the participants who've joined us today on this webinar, if you are interested in, if you're either interested or you feel like the FSU Black alumni is not doing enough, we encourage you to bring that feedback directly to myself or bring that to Shari Williams, who is our president, or to any of the other members, and let us know that you want to be involved in your geographic area, or virtually. Or if you don't feel like we're doing enough, let us know that, but then be prepared for me to turn around and ask you, okay, how are you going to help us, roll out, whatever initiative it is that you have in mind. So that's what we're doing. And thank you to all the panelists for your insight about what you're doing in your respective areas. What I'd like to do now is shift gears a little bit. Last time we had tons of questions that came in or part of the registration process of the webinar. People submitted questions, and we tried to get through a good number of those. There's absolutely no way, in an hour or an hour and a half, we can get through the hundreds of questions that we received. But we did pull some more questions to ask of our panelists, and I will direct those questions to our panelists now. I will, for the people joining us on the webinar, for our participants, I will say this. Our panelists represent the university, and they represent, a piece of the university. And so some of the questions that have been posed, they're going to provide their answer, but it may not be the answer that you're looking for as it relates to your community or as it relates to things outside of the university. And so I would just ask everyone to listen to the answers. If you think there's more that can be done, let us know. But I'll start with Michelle. Michelle, is there any reverse discrimination that exists with human resources or the anti-racism task force? And this is an interesting question because we hear this often, and we actually heard it on the first task force meeting, where the sentiment of some people is that when you focus on diverse issues or on increasing diversity, in fact, you're practicing reverse racism. What is your response to that?
Okay, so I can start with two very simple answers to both parts of those questions, no and no, but I'll explain my answers now. So I think we need to start with a working definition of reverse discrimination. And I looked around. I know I got the question in advance, so I looked and said, where can we find a good definition that puts everything into context? So I'm going to read you a definition that I found. And it's reverse discrimination is discrimination against members of a dominant or majority group in favor of members of a minority or historically disadvantaged group, right? So I think with that definition, it ties into a lot of misconceptions about the work that is done in the equity and diversity and inclusion work. And the idea that, I guess, correcting some historically wrongs in the long term will have a negative impact on those who aren't part of that group or are part of the underrepresented cohort. In the 90s, the late 90s particularly, the term affirmative action was often used when referring to reverse discrimination, right? And the programming that resulted from affirmative action. Often folks thought that those from underrepresented groups were given advantages over others, particularly as it related to hiring and admissions in higher education. Those were the two hot topics. So from the HR perspective, as it relates to reverse discrimination and its connection with affirmative action, we are bound as an entity that receives federal funding to abide by the Department of Labor's EEO, Equal Opportunity Employment, and affirmative action rules, pretty much, right? So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that we utilize quotas when we're hiring or recruiting students. It doesn't mean that we have to have so many of a certain number, or we're giving an underrepresented group an advantage in the hiring process. Ultimately, we want to hire the best candidate for the job. That is primary. With affirmative action, the issue is, what efforts are you making to be inclusive, to develop a diverse pool of applicants, a diverse pool of candidates? How are you reaching out? With the idea that the playing field should be level, and in some instances it is not. So it's the effort that comes with affirmative action. And I often think that folks misunderstand that effort is reverse discrimination. In my work that I do as far as it relates to compliance and equity, we would never want to disadvantage any group of people, right? And so when we're doing this type of work, we are very aware of the potential impact on everyone. And so our goal is to be inclusive. Now, we have a particular charge here in Florida as an institution of higher education to ensure that the students that we admit, as well as the faculty and staff that we hire to serve them, is reflective of the population of the state. And we do have a pretty diverse state, especially when you go beyond the Big Bend area and you go further south, right? So we're making every effort in our hiring, in our recruitment, faculty, staff, and students, that we cast a wide net, right? And we find the best talent possible, knowing that we'd want that talent to be reflective of those who we are serving. So again, to reiterate my answer to both of those, no for the human resources piece, and for the anti-racism task force, absolutely not. I think maybe folks may be caught on the term anti-racism. And, you know, again, knowing the terminology, understanding the language is so important. Some of the work that we initially did with the task force is to talk about the language and the words and the terminology and get an understanding of what we really mean by that, right? We've often seen recently anti-racism be used interchangeably with equity and diversity. And it's very different. It's very different. It's more of a macro approach to addressing structural, institutional, systemic issues that have existed for a very long time and has impacted all of us in some way, right? I think where we find ourselves right now in this nation is indicative of some of those structural problems. So our anti-racism efforts on the task force is to look at the systemic and the institutional and the structural and how we can get beyond that and tackle some of those issues, because they really do exist. So no reverse discrimination, and we are being proactive so that we create the best campus community for everyone.
Yeah, thanks, and thank you for also touching on, you know, your specific look at the language that you're using. So for people who are not privy to listening to someone like you explain this, how do we collectively educate others that on this concept that focusing on diversity or focusing on anti-racism isn't reverse discrimination?
Well, I think you definitely have to take some opportunities to educate yourself. You know, we have on our diversity and inclusion webpage a wealth of resources that have been vetted by specialists and scholars who are here on campus, right? You have to definitely take a look at the source. You know, I'm always having that conversation with my kids when they're doing research. You know, we are very often driven to that easy piece of information. Social media has become such a resource for folks, but you have to be really careful about, you know, the source and what you're reading. I think also, and this is what I'm learning a lot in this period, is engaging people in conversation, having space to ask questions and to talk it out. A lot of the work that we do with NCBI is learning each other's stories, hearing each other's, you know, what they believe and what they think. And then, so that's so important. You know, this is an opportunity here for the folks who are attending to kind of hear, you know, how we're approaching the work and talk about some of those definitions. But I think folks need to take opportunities to engage and also take advantage of resources that are available. And we even on the DNI webpage, our collection of resources are even, we drill down to K through 12 to provide support in those areas as well.
All right, thanks. And I, before I asked that question, I meant to also say for Brandon and Geneva, if you have anything you want to add, and then also Michelle, when I ask the questions of Brandon and Geneva, if you all have anything you want to add to it, feel free. So the question was answered by Michelle, but Brandon or Geneva, do you have any thoughts as well about, you know, this concept of some people thinking that focusing on diversity equates to reverse discrimination?
Well, you know, I think personally for me, I think Michelle really kind of hit it on the head. A lot of it is just about making sure you're on the same page of where you're starting in the conversation. And that education piece is so key. And sometimes you realize that you're not even starting at the same foundation in the conversation, so you'll never meet in the middle, ever. If you're starting on two different ends and you're starting with two different foundations, you'll never get there. But like Michelle said, I think if you have that opportunity to have someone sit and listen, and you listen to their story as well, so you can better understand where they're coming from. Generally, what you find is that you can find common ground and find a way to meet in the middle. But that education and just explaining to people your viewpoint or, you know, where you're coming from, I think is key in it.
Very great. And while I have you up, Brandon, I have a question for you.
Sure.
What objective measures will you use to ensure you are reaching your goals within the Division of Student Affairs and the Anti-Racism Task Force?
Absolutely. So I think, you know, the primary way is going to be data and assessment. And, you know, you look at the numbers because the numbers, I think, tell you what you need to know, and not about checking a box. It's not about how you feel or what you think. But if you look at the numbers and you look at the assessments based on what you're trying to achieve, I think it gives you the answer you need. And specifically for the Subcommittee on Campus Climate, one of the charges or one of the tasks is for us to develop a means of collection, maintenance, access, and review of data centrally so that the university can easily map the progress in this particular area. And I know I mentioned earlier, you know, to give you that example of a search committee, if you say that you want to have more Black, brown, and minoritized voices at the table, then I think you have to look and see who's at the table and who's not at the table. You know, that's a pretty easy one to target. You can't say, oh, I don't understand why we keep ending up with the same search committees and the same pools if you're not actively and strategically looking at who you're putting at the table. And also I go back to the relationship we have with HR to be able to certify the pools. I think also when we talk about wanting to have more welcoming and inclusive spaces, well, let's look at our spaces. Right now, we're in the middle of building a new student union. We are being very strategic and intentional right now in the conversations we're having about how this space is going to be laid out. What will you see? What will welcome you when you walk into the facility? So if one of our goals is to ensure that we're giving a nod to our relationship with the Seminole Tribe of Florida, why don't we have one of the first things you see when you walk in, history and a storyline of that relationship? And so we've already had that first conversation with some of the tribe leadership to ask them, how can we honor the relationship? So many people are confused about the relationship that we have, and it's so controversial. How can we actually tell that story in a way that people will enjoy it, in a way that it's educational, in a way that people, maybe they don't agree with it still, but they can acknowledge that, okay, so this is the story, because there's so much misinformation, I think, out there. Also, within Student Affairs, I have a director of strategic planning and assessment who their primary role is to ensure that they track our efforts and they keep us on time and on task. And then the last thing I'll mention is we have gotten approval to hire a new director of student equity and inclusion. And I think that as we look forward to many of these efforts that we want to put in place, I think having someone to come in and kind of direct and lead that, of course, with myself and Michelle and many others, I think having, you know, you asked the question earlier, who's going to direct that? As we're being pulled in so many directions, who's going to focus on some of these very specific efforts? Well, I think this is a step in the right direction, being able to hire a director level position to come in and direct many of these efforts while we focus on maybe some higher level things, I think is going to be key and crucial as we move forward.
Yeah, I go back to a comment that, or part of what Michelle was talking about earlier in her introduction, actually, about focus groups. You know, when you, Brandon, lead the sort of campus climate assessment from a student perspective, but then Michelle is doing something similar with staff and they're doing focus groups with staff. It's not until you triangulate the data from both the quantitative measurements and the qualitative measurements, so you can dig in deep and get specific, whether it's anecdotal or whether it's a trend, but get from the people who are experiencing these things, their input. It's not until we can put all of that data together do we have a clear picture and we can make a very specific path forward. So I appreciate your efforts. Michelle or Geneva, anything you want to add to Brandon's comments about objective measurements in your areas?
I think for us in the Career Center, I mean, we're within the division, so we're, doing a lot of the same efforts, but we have our own strategic plan within the Career Center. And so we always, when we say we're going to do something, we create measurable outcomes for it. And so I think, to echo what everyone has said, I think maybe what's frustrating for some people is that this process takes time, right? I think we would all love to be fast forward a year where we have a lot of these things in place that we're discussing now, but I think the intentionality and building that foundational knowledge is important. And so I think there are ways to check for that understanding of, like, do we have a shared understanding of these definitions and why this work's important? Yes, great, now let's move forward. So I think we have those kind of built-in benchmarks and checks for ourselves, but I think that understanding that the process takes time and that we really want to make informed decisions throughout. And so using that data to help us make those.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with that, Geneva. I think we already have things in place for measurement. Often with EDI work, it's a lot of qualitative. And so how do you measure that? So that definitely, that lends to the need for engagement and checking in to see how things are working out. We have 7 faculty staff affinity groups on campus currently, and my office has increased its engagement with those groups. And these are groups that are kind of like identity groups for faculty and staff. We have a Black faculty and staff network, a Latinx faculty and staff network, and 4 others. And so we are engaging with them as well on, their needs and their feedback. So the engagement piece is going to be big in how we measure our success, and also communicating that to the campus community. A lot of work goes on behind the scenes that people are not aware of. So we're working on a mechanism to engage folks, to let them know, report out. Often it's referred to as transparency, and I do believe we're very transparent. But I think when you get caught up in doing the work and moving forward, sometimes that piece of just updating folks gets lost. So we're working to make sure. One of the examples is the way that the task force is set up, that we're having public meetings, that we're recording, that we're allowing people to engage. We will continue that type of engagement, even when the task force is no longer appointed.
Great, thanks. And coming back to you, Geneva, a question. What ways can FSU better advocate for Black and Brown students on campus? How is the Career Center in specific setting examples for real change?
Yeah, great question. I think in terms of the first part, what can we do to better advocate for Black and Brown students on campus? I think, the President's Task Force is a perfect example of the biggest thing I think we need to do, which is listen. I think our students, if you've seen the movement in this country, it's led by the youth, as I like to call them. I'm fully entrenched in my 30s, so I can call them the youth now. But the generation right below us, really is leading the way. And so I think we need to listen, and we need to not just listen to their concerns, but then take that information and figure out how we can shift and adapt what we're doing to better serve them. And so I think the Anti-Racism Task Force is a great example of one of those things where, again, it may not have happened as quickly, but I think the response is where it needs to be now. And the fact that we took and heard concerns from our student body and then are shifting to do that. So I think listening and shifting what we're doing is one thing. I think also, and I don't just say this because I run our mentorship program, but I think mentorship is really important to support our students of color. And so looking at ways like our diversity chats and initiatives we're doing this fall, looking at ways to engage them and connect them with professionals who look like them, who have shared common experiences, and who they can learn from. The power of mentorship is huge in a student's success, not only in undergrad, but throughout their careers. And so we're really looking at ways to enhance those connection points between our Black and Brown students and, directly with mentors. And then I think representation that we've all touched on is hiring. I think that representation and seeing people who look like our students in faculty positions and staff positions, that's crucial. And I think, Michelle's office, HR, and her team have been great partners for us in the Career Center. So example of real change is that we've looked at pretty critically at our hiring practices and are ensuring we now have a diversity and equity statement on all of our promotional materials when we have a position open. We're looking at expanding our recruiting efforts in terms of where the positions are posted. So you've heard that a lot, but making sure that we're casting as wide a net as possible to find the best candidate. and being super intentional in our recruitment, I think is another thing that we're really looking to do to move forward. For our career advisors, so we have graduate students who are career advisors for our students. This year, we've had the most diverse group ever that we're excited about for our career advisors. And then we're just looking at our ways to strengthen our relationships with SGA, but with BSU specifically, that's going to be one of our effort areas this fall, in addition to the care liaison I mentioned. So those are just a couple of things that we're working on to better support those students.
Okay, question, follow-up for you. And I'm glad you touched on this concept of mentoring and ensuring that students have someone that looks like them, because it's been a proven research many times over that one of the greatest determinants of student academic success is having someone that can help them understand the expectations, understand how to navigate some of these things, and often that affinity with someone who looks like them or has a similar background will help in that process. But from the Career Center standpoint, do you all, and this is not a rhetorical question, this is a question that I have of you, do you all do any type of longitudinal studies to track the success, career placement and career success of our Black and Brown students once they have left FSU? Like, how do we know that this education that we're receiving from FSU translates into long-term career success for our Black and Brown students?
Yeah, so we do, for all students, we do what's called a graduating senior survey. So when students are leaving the institution, they share information with us on what are your post-graduation plans? Are you going to graduate school? If you did decide to pursue full-time employment, are you successful in that? So how did you interview? Did you hire? Did you defer? And so that information helps us at the front end. We send a follow-up as well. But it's a great question about tracking people past when they leave here. And so I think that's where programs that bring alumni back into the fold is where we get a lot of that information. And so we don't have like a pipeline to figure out exactly where everyone has gone and what they've done. And so that's why we've kind of created these programs to engage them. And so the graduating senior survey data could be broken out racially to check out the different groups and their success rate. That would give us an idea of where they are at graduation. But again, that piece after it, that's where programs like Professional Mentors, where we're engaging people and getting that information. And then we engage our alumni outside of that as well and trying to get them connected to specific student populations through panels and stuff like that. So we get a lot of that experience, those experiences shared with us after the fact, but still looking for a way to kind of get a better pipeline of that information back to us to boomerang back.
All right, great, thanks. So the next question is actually for me, and I'll answer it, but then I would ask that our other panelists also weigh in. And the question was, or is, how can we move forward together until we can get everyone to agree that there is a systemic problem? There's very straightforward question, but not an easy answer. So there's two parts to this for me. And I'll go in reverse order because it says, how can we move forward together until we can get everyone to agree that there's a systemic problem? I don't know that we'll ever get everyone to agree that there's a systemic problem. And I will refrain from making this political, but a question was asked of the president just yesterday. Do you agree that systemic racism exists or that a systemic problem exists? And so the most powerful position in our country couldn't answer that question straightforwardly. He wouldn't say yes or no that there's a systemic racism problem. And so in this question, to get everyone to agree that there's a systemic problem, I don't know that we can get there. And as we address racially based issues and discrimination and diversity, equity, and lack of inclusion, there isn't ever an ending point. It's an ongoing, in my opinion, it's an ongoing evolution. It's an ongoing struggle. It's ongoing education. It's ongoing focus. But there's never a point where, I don't think there's ever a point where the task force, our training efforts, our career placement efforts, or anything else will say, hey, we got it solved, or we trained everyone, therefore we're done, or we managed that one issue that we were facing, and so check the box, racism is over. And so I don't know that we'll ever get everyone on the quote unquote same page or to agree there, but what can we do to move forward? That's also a tough question, because starting, as Brandon alluded, when you start with people that are at such opposite ends of different spectrums or continuums, just getting towards some understanding is progress. It's probably not enough for most people. It's not enough for me, but getting people to, as Stephen Covey would say, seek first to understand, then to be understood in one of the 7 habits, getting people to try to empathize with others' situation, with their lived experiences, to understand where they're coming from before you try to convince them of the right way to do things. And I'm speaking from, both perspectives. The other day, I was on social media and I saw the statement that FSU Athletics had issued about standing in support of its Black athletes. And the majority of the comments in response to that were positive, but I was thoroughly embarrassed and disheartened, honestly, to read some of the comments that people thought were appropriate to respond in support of that statement by FSU Athletics. The heart of that statement is not, it's not reverse racism. The heart of that statement was just saying that in these trying times, we want our Black athletes to know that we're here to support them. It didn't say that we're not here to support anyone else. It didn't say that we're placing them on a pedestal above anyone else. It's just letting them know that in case we haven't told you, because FSU, just like many other institutions of higher education and learning, had to evolve into the place where it is now, but before that has a long history, a documented history of racism across the board, even in athletics. We wanted to let the athletes know that we don't stand for what may have been represented in the past. But in response to that, people started posting things about, well, it's only through affirmative action that any Black athletes or Black students are at FSU anyway. Or, well, now that FSU has turned its back on white people, I guess I'll root for the University of Florida or University of Miami, which is, evil in and of itself. Things like that dishearten me, but they also make me more passionate about this continuing education. And even when I'm down, because the question is, what can we do to move forward together? Even when I see things like that, it increases my resolve to participate in webinars like this. It increases my resolve to be a part of educational series where, as I am participating, I'm learning just as much as that I may be teaching, right? And so I think it's an ongoing struggle. It's a never-ending battle, but it's something that even as you may feel discouraged, disheartened, disappointed, you can find opportunities to continue to build education, to build communication and dialogue with the people who may not see things your way, and you may learn something from them as well. I'll turn it over to the other panelists for your insight and input on this question as well.
Well, I'd like to just start by just agreeing completely with you about the idea of hearing someone else's voice and understanding their story before you seek to, have them hear yours. Since I've been doing the NCBI training, I've learned so much about the power of meeting people where they are and then working together for a common understanding if possible. We walk through this world with so many different lenses, right, of how we view the world. Most of it influenced by our life experiences, right? So to be able to kind of put on another pair of lenses and not your own and see the world through that lens is half the battle. I think it's so important. So then again, it goes back to the engagement piece and being able to hear each other's stories and not always be reactive, but embracing and understanding and listening. Not everyone is going to support these efforts. And I think another thing that you mentioned, Ali, is passion. The question is, how do we move forward? So for those of us who are engaged in this work professionally, I think there's a foundation of passion for this work. And I think that will keep it moving forward. The fact that it is never a checked box or a completed certificate It is continuous, arduous work, which sometimes can be disheartening, but you just have to keep at it. And because what we're seeing now is that this work is not being done in isolation or in silos, that we're crossing aisles and intersecting with different people to do the work, encourages me that there is hope that we can dismantle some of the areas, the structural issues that we have.
Thanks, Michelle. Brandon or Geneva?
I think also, you know, it's important. I know there's a huge movement in this country, like cancel culture, right? But I think it's important to set standards for behavior as an institution and as a community to really like set the standards of what we expect and the community we're trying to build and hold people up to those standards. So I think even though we're not going to all move forward on the same page, I think from a foundational understanding and explicitly stating this is what we value and this is where we stand. And then when things come in conflict with that we're able to address it head on. So I think setting some common standards of behavior so that we as an institution are saying this is what matters and holding people up to that standard, I think can help us move forward as well.
Thanks. Brandon, anything to add?
I think I'll just reiterate what was already said. I think we move together, move forward together slowly. This work won't happen overnight. And I think one of the techniques that I've been using, and it goes back to some of the NCBI work that Michelle and I have been doing, but it's this understanding of where people are coming from, you know, and I'll use Black Lives Matter as an example. You know, when I hear people get offended by that comment, I have to take a step back and understand that we both add a word to that statement. It's just that other people add the word only before it, and I add the word to, T-O-O, after it. So when I hear that statement, I hear Black Lives Matter too. And some other people hear only Black Lives Matter. So we're seeing the same thing, we're hearing the same thing, but we're not hearing the same thing. And I think taking that step back and just saying, okay, well, help me understand why you hear that. When you see that statement, why do you get so worked up? And just do my best, you know, in myself to understand where they're coming from. Is there something else, you know, that has happened in your past that causes that might help me better understand? So maybe we can have a conversation and maybe we don't cancel each other out and say, well, you just don't get it. We're going to go to our separate corners and we're never going to move forward together. And so I think it's going to be a slow process, but Ali, like you, I'm here for the work and I'm in it for the long haul. And so it doesn't bother me that it moves slow, but I know that it frustrates a lot of people because you think it's 2020. How can we still be having these conversations? But yeah, 2020 has been an interesting run in itself. So we still got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. So another question, and this is for anyone and everyone, but this was another question that was submitted to us. And this actually came from the first webinar that we did. We never got around to answering it, but it was, I think it was in the context of police brutality. And we had another recent incident that's being discussed now coming out of Kenosha, Wisconsin. The question was, how do you feel about police reform in cities and on campus specifically? And what do you believe is the next step for FSU as it relates to this? So any one of our panels.
Okay, I'll start.
Go for it.
As far as the question is, how do I feel about police reform in cities and on campus and our next steps? I have more input into next steps for FSU. We actually have representation on the task force from FSU PD. I know it during my tenure here at the university, we have worked very closely with PD as far as engagement with the campus community, particularly students. We see it as a partnership. There is always room for growth in any entity. And I think I sat in, or was it, yeah, maybe June, when the president brought together local Tallahassee officials, members of TPD, members of the campus community. We had about an hour and a half long conversation. Again, I don't want to harp on it, but you know, that's a rare opportunity to do that. And so we heard some things, and we are taking it to heart. I know that for Tallahassee, their community policing group, the advisory group, I think it is, they recently met as I was driving in. They were talking about it on WFSU and just engaging in that way. I think there's work to do. You know, I won't say that everything is perfect, but I see behind the scenes the work that Chief Brown does in preparing her officers, the fact that they do diversity and inclusion training, that they've established an internal group to look at diversity and inclusion and policing, particularly community policing, you know, because we are a distinct community here at FSU. So I think the work is being done. There's hope. I know the big hot topic is the defunding term. And again, talking about terminology and what does that mean for one group versus another group. So, you know, I haven't really done much research into the defunding discussion, but I will. So I won't comment on it right now because I don't have a wealth of knowledge, but I'll open it to my colleagues on the panel.
Brandon or Geneva, any comments?
Sure, I can jump in there. And, you know, I think this is it's just such a heavy question because there are so many qualifiers, I think, that can come with the question depending on the circumstance. But I think in general, my answer is it's something that needs to be discussed. There is so much going on in the world right now. Clearly, there is something going on that people need to get to the table and sit down and talk about. Why do people feel the way they feel? You know, why do minoritized groups feel that they are being treated differently than, you know, some other groups? And so I don't think we can simply ignore it. And even when I think about on campus, you know, my experiences are so different from some of the stories that I hear as an administrator and even as a former student. You know, I personally never had a bad interaction with a campus police officer, but certainly I've heard from some students about interactions they have had. And so I think we have to come to the table and sit down and listen to those stories and bring those to the appropriate parties and say, we need to talk about this. You know, is this a misunderstanding? Is this a miseducation of a process? You know, I think about even when we're having conversations about why body cam footage wasn't being released. Well, some people didn't know the process that you have to go through before body cam footage can be released, and whether or not, you know, it depends on what county you're in. It depends on what state you're in. It depends on if it needs to go before the grand jury first. There's all these different bits and pieces. So a lot of it is educational pieces. The next step for FSU, I think, is to involve more people in the conversation. And one of the specific pieces that the Campus Climate Subcommittee will look at is adding this student community relations liaison within the force, so that we have more voices at the table so they can hear directly from students about the experiences that they're hearing from their peers, so that they can tell them directly, this is what I understand to be the situation, or here is a specific incident that I want to talk to you about. Because what I can tell you, being an administrator, there are times where I hear one story and that story doesn't quite match up, and vice versa. And so it's hard to decipher through all the bits and pieces to get down to the nitty gritty. But I guess my general answer is I definitely think that it's something that needs to be looked at. It's a conversation that needs to happen. And I don't know that we can move forward if we ignore it or if we don't see the need to sit down and have that conversation, so we can all at least be on the same page. We don't all have to agree, but I think we all need to be on the same page about where everyone is coming from.
Yeah, and I would add to what you just said, Brandon. So first of all, again, I'm not on campus, so I'm not sure of all the initiatives that are already there. But I know, dating back many, many, many years ago when I was a student at Florida State, you know, these discussions and saying we need to have a conversation and saying, you know, we need to have a discussion in light of, you know, for this question specifically with the police department, these have been ongoing, you know, forever. I think establishing exactly what you said, the student liaison as a formal and permanent piece of the fabric of campus, where you have a group that is connected with the police specifically for the task of explaining what the climate is around interactions with police for Black students and for anyone else is important, because often we see people trying to come together at times of crisis, and it's appropriate, but it's more appropriate to be coming together before there is a crisis so that we can avoid those situations. If we have education for the police, education for the students, education on how interaction should occur, then hopefully you avoid having to have some post-incident, crisis intervention, right? So, and again, I'm speaking from my lack of knowledge on what's already happening there, but I think what you described is certainly an important step. Geneva, was there anything you wanted to add to this as well?
Not especially. I think they both summarize it. I think, the data shows you can fall anywhere you want, politically or whatever, but the data shows that, we really do have an issue with policing in this country and our so I think it's important to know, to not ignore it, and to know that we have to address it and we have to have these difficult conversations. And as an institution, I think all of us are on the same page. Is we want to make sure our students feel welcome wherever they are on campus. And so if there are difficult conversations that need to happen, or if we need to make changes, I think we're going to do that. Because I know that as an institution, we're committed to ensuring that every student feels comfortable on campus.
All right, great, thanks. So before we close out, are there any last comments, questions from any of our panelists that you'd like to share with our participants today? Let's start with you, Michelle.
More comments and an invitation. Just want to thank you for sharing the space and allowing us to share the space with you. I hope we continue the engagement in some form. I know Julie and Ali have worked hard to get this together. I will be working or partnering with Jeff in the committee on some ongoing work. And I invite you all to, attend some of the task force meetings. And when there are opportunities for you all to provide input and engage with us in any way, please do that, because we definitely want to hear from you all as well.
Okay, great, thanks. Geneva, any last comments?
We'd just like to echo, thank you everyone for joining us. If you're in the environment, we are all in, Zoom fatigue is real. So I appreciate you taking some time around the lunch hour to join us for this important conversation. I would encourage you, if you are an alumni or a friend of the university, which you're an alumni if you're here, would love to have you serve as a professional mentor. That information will come in a follow-up, I'm sure, but we would love for you to share your diverse experiences with our students. And so I really appreciated the opportunity to talk today. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Brandon.
Absolutely. Just I echo the sentiment of my colleagues, and that just grateful to be a part of this conversation, and just looking forward to continuing the conversation, because this is important work. These are important conversations, and I definitely think that this is a good step in the right direction to continue these.
Great, thanks. So to our panelists, thank you for joining us. Returning panelists, new panelists, thank you. Before I turn it back over to Julie, I wanted to just say, so reiterate that this is an ongoing conversation. It's never going to be done, but it's definitely something that I think we should all support. And if we have webinar number 3, hopefully we can address any comments, questions, concerns that people have coming out of this one. So thank you all for participating, taking time out of your day. I know for me, this is 4 of 7 Zoom calls that I'll be on today. So thank you again for having me as both a participant, panelist, and the host of the webinar. With that, I'll turn it back over to Julie.
Thank you, Ali, so much. Thank you, panelists. I can't tell you, or I don't even probably have to tell you, lucky we are at the Alumni Association and FSU to have brilliant conversation like this around this very important topic. I am so thankful for the thoughtfulness, for the leadership. And again, what I continue to commit to you is that your Alumni Association, the FSU Alumni Association, is committed to fostering this type of dialogue so that we can create a better future. And that's really the work, the steps, day by day, week by week, getting to where we need to be for our students and for our alumni. So Ali, thank you for leading this important discussion. Thank you, Brandon, Michelle, Geneva, for volunteering your time today. I know you all are so busy as students get back on campus. We are better because of the difference that you are making in our community and in our campus. I want everyone to know that our fall virtual calendar is up. If you go to alumni.fsu.edu/events, please check out our calendar of events. Join us anytime. Submit those questions ahead of time. We do take your feedback and your questions seriously. You'll get a survey about today's webinar. We'd love to hear from you. And many of you tuning in today are members of the Alumni Association, and we could not do this type of programming without you. So thank you so much to our members and our corporate partners who continue to support our outreach in these ways. Thank you so much. Have a great day. And as always, go Noles.